The following pre-recorded broadcast is presented and paid for by friends of Fred R. Harris in the interest of informing the voters. Issue 66, a look at the issues facing Oklahoma and the nation. Tonight, a panel of Oklahoma newspapermen put their questions to United States Senator Fred R. Harris, whom Newsweek magazine has chosen as one of the most outstanding young men to come to Congress in recent years. The newsmen in tonight's panel include Mr. Wallace Kidd of the Anadarko Daily News, Mr. Ralph Smith of the Bartlesville Examiner Enterprise, Mr. Ted Phillips of the Seminole Producer, and Mr. Larry Hammer of the Fairview Republican. Now, here with the first question is Mr. Wallace Kidd.
Senator, lawlessness and violence are causing great concern in America. What can be done about it?
Well, I think, first of all, we ought to recognize that it is a matter of great concern, and I think those of us in public office, whether on the national or state or local level, have got to make it very clear that this is a nation of laws, and we simply cannot condone lawlessness and violence. A part of the problem is, of course, the great root causes of some of these problems. Lawlessness and violence simply must be stopped. On the federal level, of course, we're limited, and rightly so, to the fact that law enforcement is primarily a state and local responsibility. But I think we can do more of our share in helping to train police and enforcement officials and assisting them in their job, as they primarily have the responsibility to carry it out. In addition to that, we can do such things as we did when the poverty bill came through the Congress this year. We adopted an amendment on the floor of the Senate, which I supported very vigorously. It says that none of those anti-poverty funds can go directly or indirectly to any person who takes part in or encourages lawlessness or rioting. In addition to that, I think it's very unfortunate that Supreme Court decisions have hampered a good deal the law enforcement people of the country, particularly in regard to voluntary confessions and admissions. And I think we've simply got to change the Constitution to allow the policeman, the law enforcement official, not to be so hamstrung as he is under those decisions. We've got 2 or 3 proposals now before the Congress. Hearings will start on them after the first of the year. And I certainly am one who feels that we've got to amend the Constitution to allow law enforcement officials to have what they need to see that lawlessness and violence is stopped.
Senator, the new cabinet-level Department of Transportation has now been established, and you played a big part in it. What will this mean for Oklahoma and the country?
Well, I was on, as you indicate, the Senate Government Operations Committee, which handled the administration's recommendation for a new Department of Transportation. We were almost totally dissatisfied with the proposal as it came to the Congress from the President for several reasons, but 3 were primarily of concern to me. One, the administration proposal would have allowed the Bureau of Public Roads, which manages our highway and road program, to be merged into the new department and lose its identity. And worse than that, as the proposal came to us, it would have allowed the Bureau of Public Roads to use some of our present highway funds for other non-highway purposes, such as the building of mass transportation systems. We corrected that in the Senate committee, and the Bureau of Public Roads will retain its identity in the new department and will also make sure that those highway funds are spent only for highways. The other aspect was in regard to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, a great facility of which is located here in Oklahoma at Oklahoma City. That department would also have lost its identity in the new department, but we changed that. I and Senator Monroney worked together very closely on that. As you know, he's Mr. Aviation in the Senate, chairman of the subcommittee on aviation. He wasn't on this committee, but he loaned me one of his staff members, and we worked together to be sure that the FAA and its great program were not weakened, because aviation is of increasing importance in this country. And lastly, very important to us was the Water Resources Development Policy. The administration bill would have transferred the determination on feasibility of new navigation projects away from the Corps of Engineers and away from the Water Resources Council over to the new department. And we thought that that was regressive, because these people, where it now is, have the experience and the knowledge and background. We didn't allow that to be done. We amended that bill to leave the determination on new navigation projects where it now is, and not only that, but we wrote into the bill itself the criteria on determining feasibility of new navigation projects to be the criteria that was in effect before November 1964, the same criteria under which we built and are building the Arkansas River Navigation Project. This is of extreme importance to Oklahoma because the bill, as we finally passed it, and I was on the conference committee between the Senate and House, and the House fought us on that part of it, but we were able to keep the Senate provisions. The bill, as we passed it and as it's become law, will give a real boost to the building of the Central Oklahoma Navigation Project to extend the benefits of navigation from not only just on the Arkansas River, but also into Central Oklahoma, and that's of extreme importance. Now, FAA and its facility in Oklahoma City, I think, will double its payroll and its personnel within the next 3 to 5 years under the new department, because they already have great expertise in investigation of accidents, in research into causes of accidents and the injuries therefrom. And I think we can expand that and use their knowledge and facilities out here in Oklahoma City, not only in aviation, but also in rail and in automobile transportation. So it's of great importance to Oklahoma and for the nation. I think it will help us develop a coordinated overall national transportation policy.
Senator, there seems to be a lot of confusion about the Supreme Court's decision on school prayers and what can be done about it. Would you comment on this, please?
Yes, and it's certainly understandable, but that does cause great concern for all of us because two great principles are involved in the matter of prayer and Bible reading. One, I strongly, as do our people in Oklahoma and throughout the country, support and believe in prayer and Bible reading so long as it's voluntary. And then the other principle involved is the time-honored principle written into our Constitution and the Bill of Rights for separation of church and state. Now, these two issues come together, the separation of church and state and the right of voluntary prayer and Bible reading. The Supreme Court of the United States held that a school board or a state legislature could not require prayer and a certain kind of prayer or prescribed Bible reading or religious exercises. And the important thing there is required. We all believe in voluntary prayer and in voluntary religious exercises. The Dirksen Amendment that we had up before the Senate not only said that a local school board could permit, but it also said that a local school board could provide for prayer and other religious exercises. And therefore, according to the testimony and some 800 pages or more of testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, it is obvious that under that amendment, the local school board could prescribe or require or provide for, as the article says. It said, the minister said, and talking to Dr. Hobbs, he opposed the Dirksen Amendment. He said, we don't need such an amendment. As implied in the First Amendment, he's talking about to the Constitution, we already have voluntary prayer and Bible reading, and I'm in favor of it. The article goes on, Dr. Hobbs fears that changing the amendment would lead to more tinkering and that eventually the clear separation, as presently stated in the Constitution, would be destroyed. I feel, he said, the government would eventually be supporting church-related institutions if we made these amendments. If we cut the First Amendment, it will bleed to death, Dr. Hobbs concluded. Now, I think that prayer and other religious exercises are too personal and too sacred to depend upon who may get elected to a local school board. And I think, as the Baptist Messenger recently wrote, all of us can institute and carry on in our homes voluntary prayer and religious exercises and Bible reading, and I think that'll have great impact on our children. And furthermore, we can, as I do, support voluntary prayer and religious exercises in our schools, and I'll continue to work for that kind of voluntary religious exercises.
Senator, Oklahoma's economy is very dependent on the health of agriculture. What is the future of agriculture in Oklahoma, and is the farmer responsible for inflation?
Well, that's actually two questions. The last one is the farmer responsible for inflation? I would answer that emphatically no. And that's not generally understood throughout the country. A lot of people who live in the Northeast think that the farmer's the fella who's raising these prices. Well, that's simply not true. because the prices now of what the farmer gets are not as high as they were, for example, 20 years ago. The housewife in America now is paying 25% of her dollar for, or 18% now, in 1965, 18% of her dollar for food, whereas in 1947 she paid 25% of her dollar for food. But the important thing to understand is that the farmer hasn't had his income raised very much. I joined with Senator Mondale and Senator McGovern in co-sponsoring a resolution we passed in the Senate, which says this, that no governmental agency, the Department of Agriculture, the Commodity Credit Corporation, the Department of Defense, the Federal Trade Commission, or anybody else can take any action which would tend to reduce the amount of money that the farmer gets for his products so long as farm prices have not arrived at parity. And we need to do that. And the people in this government need to understand that it's not the farmer who's at fault. I, for one, have been one of those who's voted and supported billions of dollars of cuts in what I thought were unessential domestic spending to get at this matter of inflation. But you can't lay it on the farmer's back, and I think we need to make that clear. And those of us in the Congress who come from agricultural states have tried to do that. Another thing we've done, and this kind of action would be prohibited under that resolution, was this. The Department of Commerce not long ago put on export controls on cattle hides. That is, they restricted the number of cattle hides that could be sold outside the country. And they said this was necessary, or else leather prices would go up so, and shoe prices would therefore go up. Well, we in our delegation fought that. And we asked for and demanded a hearing before the Department of Commerce. We got one. We stated our position very strongly, as, for example, that out of a $10 pair of shoes, the price of the hides is only 68 cents. So you can't blame it on the rancher. And this is important because cattle industry is so important in Oklahoma and is a big part of agriculture in our state. We also pointed out that while the export controls on hides had been put on ostensibly to hold down shoe prices, the shoe people had gone ahead after that and raised their prices this last fall by 8 to 10%. So we got part of that rolled back, the export controls, but we weren't satisfied with that. And this indicates how we work together in our delegation. Tom Steed serves on the Senate, on the House Appropriations Committee, and Tom is known as a fellow that once he gets started, he's like a bulldog, and we are on this issue because it's important to Oklahoma. So he helped write into the appropriations bill in the House a provision that the Department of Commerce's budget, the money we gave them to operate that department, not one dime of it could be used to enforce these export controls on cattle hides. And Senator Monroney and I kept it in on the Senate side, and that now is the law. So we feel the farmer's not responsible for food price increases. We think other things are at fault, and that's why we've tried to get at them by such actions as holding down on unessential domestic spending.
Senator, there's no doubt about the concern on the situation in Vietnam. Do you support our Vietnam policy?
I do, Wallace. I've felt it would be rather unseemly of me to publicly criticize the President's position on Vietnam and his handling of that very difficult and unfortunate situation unless I had some alternative to offer. And even in that instance, I've felt that it was my responsibility to talk to him in private. Now, that's been my position, and I think it's a proper one for this reason. What I say as a member of the United States Senate about the situation in Vietnam is not only published, say, in Anadarko or in Oklahoma, but according to the dispatches that we see from these other countries, it's also published in Hanoi and Peking and Moscow. So it's been my position that we ought to tuck in our belts here at home to make whatever sacrifice we have to make, to cut down whatever we have to cut down in domestic expenditures, to give those young men in Vietnam everything necessary to bring that situation to an honorable and successful conclusion. The President's been out in the Pacific at the Manila Conference. We met with him privately, the senators did, and he asked for our best wishes and for our prayers that we might find some way on an honorable basis to settle that thing. In the and he has mine, both my best wishes and my prayers. But we've got more than 300,000 young men, the finest young men America ever produced out there, and there's nothing theoretical about that. And so long as I'm in the United States Senate, I'll not by my voice or by my vote indicate to the other side or indicate to our young men that this country is anything but in full support of them and of what they need to bring that situation to a successful close.
Senator Harris, you're a member of the Senate Public Works Committee, the same powerful committee which the late Senator Robert S. Kerr served on for many years. Is there some special significance in this assignment for Oklahoma?
Yes, I think Oklahomans understand quite well that our future in this state depends very much upon how we use our water resources. You know, actually, the water that's usable, that's on this globe, only gets down to, there's about 1%. Part of it, of course, the big part of our water is in the oceans. A lot of it is polluted. A lot of it runs by without ever being used. And so it gets down to just 1% of the water in the world is usable. Now, what we're trying to do in Oklahoma started on the program of the late, great United States Senator Robert S. Kerr, is to use to maximum advantage every drop of water that falls in this state or runs through it. And that means upstream flood control. It means soil and water conservation, stopping the water where it falls, and that water which does run off, we catch it in basins of varying sizes and use it for industrial and municipal water supply, for recreation, for flood control, and for navigation. And so it's that committee, the Senate Public Works Committee, that he served on, that I now serve on, that has jurisdiction over that kind of program.
You recently were quoted as saying that one of the locks and dams on the Arkansas River should be named after Congressman Ed Edmondson. Wouldn't it be rather unusual to name such a facility after a living person?
Well, it would be. We've done that. We've named, just here lately, we've named some projects in the country after living people. And I think it's so justified that it ought to be done. Senator Kerr himself said many times that the Arkansas River Navigation Project, which is going to have such tremendous impact on our economic development and on building new private jobs and attracting industry into Oklahoma, could not have been a reality, could not be where it is today, except for the vital work of Congressman Edmondson. For example, back during the Eisenhower administration, when he, the President Eisenhower, had instituted his no new starts policy for no new public works projects, it was Ed Edmondson who got a group around him over there in the House, and they were able to override that policy and get the Arkansas River going and to get it, keep it on the 1970 schedule. Or just here lately. Now, some people say the Arkansas River is no issue and it's on the downhill grade now, but that's just not true. We had a crisis on it just last session. The bill was tied up in the overall Omnibus Rivers and Harbors bill, and it looked like there was no way that we could pass that overall bill in time to get the authorizations we needed on the Arkansas River. And therefore, we were faced with the prospect of having to stop some contracts in process, to lay some people off, to delay letting contracts. Well, Ed Edmondson dreamed up the idea that why don't we pull out of this bill, the overall bill, a special basins bill to include the Arkansas River Navigation Project and pass it separately. Well, that's what we did. On the Senate side, Senator Monroney and I introduced that. And over on the House side, Ed Edmondson didn't put his name at the top of it. He said, I'm not so much interested in credit, I'm interested in trying to pass it. So he said, what I'm going to do is go to some of these fellows on the House Public Works Committee and let them put their name at the top of the list, and I'll go down at the bottom someplace and let them get the credit. Well, we got the bill just by that method, our special basins bill, and kept the river on schedule. Ed Edmondson didn't get the credit he ought to have, but Oklahoma got the Arkansas River Navigation Project. So we've named one of the lock and dams after Robert S. Kerr, and it's very appropriate that that should be done. But I think also we ought to give bouquets and praise and proper credit where it's due to the living. So next year I'm going to introduce a bill to go up the river from the Robert S. Kerr lock and dam and pick another lock and dam out and name it after Ed Edmondson, because I think he deserves it.
Senator, lots of people seem to take it for granted that navigation on the Arkansas River is going to bring a lot of huge economic growth and development. Is this project really going to bring that much to Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think it's hard for us to realize. Senator Kerr used to tell us over and over, but it's hard for us to realize what that's going to mean because of the water transportation rates we'll have and the impact that will have all over this state. That's been one of our deterrents to industrialization and new private jobs, and it will have tremendous impact. But I want to put an if in there. And the if is that we get ready for it. One thing is to get ready in education and technical skills training. Another thing is to get ready in roads and highways that lead into those ports and lead in and around those lakes that we can use for both industrial and recreational purposes. Now, that's why we're interested in the Ozarks Regional Development Commission. One of the main purposes that we hope to serve through this Ozarks Regional Development Commission, headed up by my good friend Bill McCandless, formerly of Oklahoma City, is to do the planning together with Arkansas and Missouri to get these rates in line, to build the transportation, the road facilities, and so forth, to get the industrial expansion going, accelerated economic growth going, so that that navigation project will be fully used. With that, of course, it will have fantastic impact on this region of America and certainly on Oklahoma.
Senator, the Wall Street Journal recently said you are slated to become chairman of the Senate Permanent Investigation Subcommittee. Is this true? And what is the proper role of Congress in investigations?
Well, I don't know. John McClellan heads up that committee which handles investigations for all of the Senate. I don't know what he plans in regard to it, but as you know, this last session, John's been busy with a good many other things, and so I've served as acting chairman of the committee during two important hearings, one on the Small Business Investment Company program administered by the Small Business Administration. We found some real loopholes and abuses in the administration of that program, and we recommended both legislative and administrative changes in it to be sure that the taxpayer gets his dollars worth for the amount of money that's in it. Some of that has already passed in legislation. Some we've yet to do. The other hearing I handled as acting chairman of the committee was on the FHA's program for multifamily housing in blighted areas. We found there, too, that we just simply hadn't been as protective of the taxpayers' interests as we ought to have been, and we've made some very strong recommendations there. I think that the Congress has a proper role, as those two hearings indicate, in investigation, because it's our job to see what's wrong with present administrative practices and legislative practices, and to make recommendations to see that that economy and efficiency and responsible government are actually in effect. So I've enjoyed serving on that subcommittee. I don't know what will become of it, but I will continue to act in whatever capacity the chairman asks me to.
Senator, in a recent newspaper story, you were quoted as saying that your work as chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Government Relations could be important in Oklahoma's efforts to improve its education. Can you explain that tie-in?
Well, it's actually the Subcommittee on Government Research, and it has oversight over the $15.5 billion the federal government annually spends in research and development throughout the country, much of which is spent through universities, but unfortunately, only a very, very small number of universities, mostly on the east or the west coast. We think that those expenditures have great impact on economic development. We think they ought to be spread around equitably. And I can predict to you that because of the work of our subcommittee, it will be spread around more equitably, and Oklahoma will get a fair share of it. Now, that's important to Oklahoma because the industries of today and tomorrow are going to be those industries tied in with brain power and education. Now, that's why it's so important, and that's why I'm for the Preston Moore's program. Preston Moore running for governor. He's talking about educational excellence in Oklahoma, and he's talking about real intensive efforts to build up our technical skills training and retraining program. And I think it's absolutely essential, if Oklahoma is going to grow economically, that we not be satisfied with average in anything really, but certainly not average in education and in skills, but we've got to be excellent at the very top in this country, and that's the future of Oklahoma, and I hope to have a part in it with Preston Moore and our delegation to help build Oklahoma as a result of my chairmanship on this subcommittee on government research.
Teamwork seems to be the central theme of the Democratic campaign. Is this just a slogan, Senator Harris, or is it really important?
Well, it's really important, and I can give you one example. Our delegation serves on committees. Every one of us have different committee assignments, so that any problem that comes up that's important to Oklahoma, we've got at least one man on the proper committee to look after that thing. I just take this, for example. Jed Johnson, down in the 6th District, is on the Armed Services Committee in the House, which is the most prestigious committee in the House, and it's really marvelous that in his first term he could get on that, and not only on it, but he ranks already 7 from the bottom on that committee. Well, now, we've got a good many military installations in Oklahoma, and some are in his district. And we're working on Clinton Sherman Air Force Base now, first to see if we can't get the government to use it itself against the plans that have been announced, or if we can't get them to continue to use it because of that great investment they've got there, then we want to find some other use for it. Jed's leading that fight because he's on the Armed Services Committee. Lately, we've got a new detachment of people assigned to Altus Air Force Base, and they had to go somewhere in the country. And we felt that was an excellent place for them to go, and Jed was able to lead that. But even outside his district, you take Tinker Air Force Base. We were trying to get a new building, bachelor's officers' quarters, for Tinker Air Force Base this year. It's very badly needed because of the new people that have come in out there, and they're badly underhoused at Tinker Air Force Base. And so it wasn't in the budget. Well, Jed Johnson led the fight on that despite the fact it wasn't in his district, because a lot of people in his district work there and because it's important to Oklahoma. So teamwork is important.
Senator, excuse me, we have time maybe for one more question. If Ted, do you have a...
Yeah, Senator, Oklahoma's congressional delegation has been lauded from many quarters as one of the strongest in the nation. Do you believe this, and if so, why?
Well, we are effective, and it's generally recognized in Oklahoma and Washington that that's so. I joined the delegation, of course, and so later, and I can speak about them, I think, with some degree of pride and I hope objectivity. It's not the largest delegation in the country by far. It's a rather small one. But it is effective because, first of all, we work. All of our people on that delegation work together. I think we need to stretch it out. You'll permit me a little partisanship here. I think we need to add to that delegation in the 1st District, Ed Cadenhead, who's one of the best candidates I think we've ever had for Congress in Oklahoma. But we work together. Not only that, we work together as a team. And then, as I said earlier, we've got the committee assignments which allow us to do those things that are really important in every field. And so we depend on each other to sort of specialize on those things that are important to the country and to Oklahoma. And that's why I'm proud to serve as a member of that team.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
You've been watching a special program on issues facing Oklahoma and the nation, Issues 66, featuring United States Senator Fred R. Harris and a panel of Oklahoma newspapermen. Members of tonight's panel included Mr. Wallace Kidd of the Anadarko Daily News, Mr. Ralph Smith of the Bartlesville Examiner Enterprise, Mr. Ted Phillips of the Seminole Producer, and Mr. Larry Hammer of the Fairview Republican. This pre-recorded program has been presented and paid for by friends of Fred R. Harris in the interest of informing you, the voter.